The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
Dawn O'Connor is the founder of Focus Bubbles and the facilitator of connection, community, and productivity. Focus Bubbles is a membership-based virtual co-working platform supporting knowledge workers to be productive from home or wherever they choose to work. Dawn says hosting bubbles and supporting their team of facilitators is the most gratifying job of her entire career. Every day she's curious and excited to learn what people are working on. She sees the enthusiasm, wisdom, and support that members share with each other and how, thanks to the Focus Bubble format, they get through some tough tasks on some tough days. Dawn has been learning and teaching what she has learned about productivity best practices and process improvement for 30 years. Whether she's hosting micro events like the Focus Bubbles or coordinating large conferences for groups like Women Presidents Organization, Dawn's goal is to foster a feeling of community. In our conversation, Dawn stressed that, to be a connector, it comes down to really listening to others, recording points of interest, and recalling that information when it matters. Really connecting well is part magic and part mastery, but Dawn has it all. Welcome back, everyone, to the Connector Next Door and to another great conversation with a new friend. Dawn, you and I have known each other for only a few months and we're introduced by a mutual friend, and I'm so glad that I have met you over the last couple of months. Welcome here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to have a little chat today.
If somebody refers me to somebody else, quite often those people in my life are connections that I trust, and they are people that I love, and I love how they show up to work. And this was no exception. I'm so glad that when I started to have the conversation with you about your work, how it actually lent itself so beautifully to this conversation about connection. And I'm just going to jump in right off the top here on a little bit about what connection means to you. We talk a lot about that word, but what does it mean to you?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's something I've been thinking about independent of meeting you, but I really want to build and create a community with what I do. And I had started down this path in my third business in my life and late in my career here to build something that I thought I wanted to scale and have it be huge and be global. And I had all these and then I realized, no, that's not what I want. I want to know each individual on some level. I want to understand what it is that makes them tick. And I mean, I'm all about productivity. That's the space I work in, my area of expertise. So I like understanding what makes someone productive, what is unique and individual to them. And so the connection part for me is, in the community that I've built, is appreciating that uniqueness of each person. And you can only do that on a certain sort of scale, right? You can't, you get beyond community, which I've read, interestingly, is about 150 to 200 people that you can hold community. And beyond that, it starts to splinter. So there's sort of a magic number in there. I don't know if I've really answered what does connection mean. Connection means understanding someone on a personal, intimate, trusting level.
And from what I know about some of your work is that it's ongoing. And I love the idea that you are working with groups of people where you do see them. You know, it might be on Zoom virtually, but you do see them and they're coming to you at times where they're really, when you're talking about the productivity and the connection. I actually had that question. I made that note earlier today that I'm like, I want to ask her that question about this balance of productivity and then still having connection, because I am somebody that is, I would say, incredibly productive, just the way that I was raised and you know, the work ethic that I gained from my parents and maybe our generation as well, where there's a certain amount of elbow grease, as my mom used to say, that you just,
Totally.
you go into the work. And productivity in my life sometimes had looked like disconnection, because I would be moving not just quickly, but I would just be so focused on the task and getting things done, that I would forget sometimes that there's, which now has become my motto, people over projects, because I have to be very intentional about making sure that the connections are there first. When you're talking about your work as a productivity expert, was that at all a shift for you, or do you see it sometimes in the focus bubbles? Do you see people trying to shift to also connection, even when they're really wanting to be productive?
Yeah, you just really articulated something. I got goosebumps because I have spent my career being very tactical and practical and about outcomes. What do you produce? What do you make? And like, let's measure it. I'm very data driven. And now at 55, it's taken me a little while. I'm digging into that more and realizing it is really more about the relationships. It's more about finding the joy in work. It's more about slowing down. And because you said you moved quickly, and I'm a very quick, like I'm disciplined and I move fast and I get things done. And I, have measured a good part of my career success has been about measuring sort of how many people did I work with. And I'm now on the completely the other side of that coin, fence, whatever the expression is. What happens in the focus bubble, and it happened this morning, sometimes there's this little magical spark of had a new person come in, and we only have 5 minutes, and there's 12 people, 15, 20, whatever it looks like. Today there were 12. And just within a 5-minute facilitation, she made a connection with one other person. There was a designer there, and then this new woman who came in had this amazing wallpaper behind her, and we were all like, wow. And then so we heard the little story of how it didn't end her marriage to put up that wallpaper. And it was just so delightful, and it was so much laughter and joy. And then we got to work because we were fueled by that laughter and that feeling like I'm not alone. I'm in my office alone, and yet I've just connected with someone from Toronto to Calgary to Vancouver. It just was so delightful. And it just reaffirmed for me, yeah, that's what I'm doing. And then we do our own work, of course, in the virtual co-working space. And some people came back and reported they totally failed in their bubble today. But again, then there was this feeling of, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that lost my focus. I'm not the only one who had my husband or my dog or my kids distract me. So it was just really lovely.
When we put ourselves out there and we want to be productive and we want to get these things done, how does the community that you have created, you shared a little bit about that, sort of the example from this morning, which is so incredibly beautiful. How are you finding people are making that shift to actually becoming more connected over time?
I'm seeing people connect, and it's interesting because I'm not really setting up a structure to facilitate networking per se. This is just a space to come and do your work with a little warm up and a little close. And so by the nature of that, everybody's there with the same intent. And so that is automatically a connection because they're bonded by the intention to do work and not to actually have time to interact with each other a lot. But what I'm seeing, so it's been almost a year of doing this, by osmosis, what I'm seeing is people learn. So say you come to the bubble and you say, I'm going to work on this client proposal today for this specific event. And then we start to hear these little clues about what people are working on. And then we get curious. And so it's instead of being this forced thing where you introduce yourself and this is what you're about, like we often do at networking events, we give our elevator speech. There's this just natural sort of curiosity that emerges. And for those of us who are paying attention, then we start to hear what other people are doing. And then people have started to reach out. And I did a survey and I learned that 17% of the people in the bubble have actually done work with each other as a result of showing up. So they've hired somebody else to edit their book, or they've hired somebody to help them build an event, etc. Just through this very gentle, it's really about continuity and consistency. So instead of like 1 hour together once every couple of months, the 5 minutes every day. So when I teach one-to-one meetings, when I coach my productivity clients on one-to-one meetings, one of the rules is duration, consistency is more important than duration. So it's shorter, more frequent meetings, touch points is more impactful than one-on-one once a week for an hour. If you do it a couple of 15-minute ones or even 5 minutes every day. So
yeah,
that principle is playing out. And again, it wasn't super intentional, but now that I'm seeing it happen, I'm going to figure out as we grow the business, how to make that, how really to harvest the benefits of that.
Yeah. And it's funny as you're talking, it's interesting how I was saying to a friend the other day, how my friendships have often been birthed out of a project or a something. So we've got our heads down, we're working, kind of side by side or shoulder to shoulder on something. And then you come out of whatever it is. And then there's certain people that will just bubble to the top as, long-term friends in that environment that you've created. When there's a focus bubble where we are truly focused on something that we want to work on, that there's a lot happening. So personally, people are setting goals, reaching those goals, putting things in motion, starting things, and even then starting those really cool connections or collaborations that is a jumping off point. But what's great about that is that it feels like, oh, you mean there's a community for me too? That it actually could be a way of connecting in a different way. You have come to this quite naturally from the times we've had to talk in the past. You've been in the productivity world for a long time, training, coaching in that world a long time. Is it something that you have noticed about yourself in the past? Is it something that came quite naturally for you, or was there a turning point? Were you that person that was just leaning in, getting things done? Productivity came very easy to you?
You have two sort of different answers. One is I'm naturally disorganized with physical stuff.
Okay.
I get into disarray quickly, papers pile up quickly, and I get very chaotic. And I don't like chaos. I like to have a sense of control, and I prefer minimalism, but I seem to always be fighting that. I'm naturally organized with time management and have this internal clock. And so I was working in corporate settings and doing training and doing kind of process analysis and facilitation. And I was just super frustrated with the inefficiency of processes in big organizations. And so that was kind of my first inkling of there's got to be a better way. And there's a part of me that I would say is like super lazy. Like I want to get to from point A to point B as quickly and efficiently as possible. And so if that means eliminating some steps that don't seem to serve a purpose. So all of those things combined with a great mentor I had when I worked at CP Rail 25 years ago or something, who said, hey, you're a natural teacher. Why don't you do some training? And so she got me into the training role. And then all of those things came together, and it just built this kind of pathway career where I started off doing customer service training and then evolved into leaving large corporate and being my own freelancer founder in different capacities and building multiple businesses and selling them because I get bored quickly. But just kind of new iterations on the same theme of efficiency, effectiveness, productivity, and now with a much more holistic view around wellness and staying whole and not sacrificing your own well-being for your productivity. So more about the balance now than I had in my youth.
What you have with the focus bubbles and the connections that are made there, did you see that already when you were doing the teaching and training? Were you kind of creating that kind of environment for people to also feel connected there?
Yeah, my whole mission usually is not, I'm a trainer, but really, truly, I say I'm a facilitator. So I bring some knowledge and some structure, but my whole goal is the people in the room or the people on the screen is drawing on the collective genius of who's there. I can offer some insight and I like to share some brain science, but then I want to hear from the group. Like, for example, I taught a workshop at Lululemon yesterday, and there was a lot of content, but I was feeling like, no, I need to hear from them, even though it's virtual and it's a bit awkward. When we stop the teaching and just listen and give them space and ask a good question, then that's when the magic happens. And when I went through the evaluations at the end, those were the key feedback points. Is like, It was so good to hear from my peers. It was so amazing to learn what other people are doing, what their best practices are, because those are things that they don't talk about every day. They talk about their work, not how they do their work.
Yeah.
So it was just really validating. I want to be more facilitating, drawing on collective genius than to be providing content.
And doesn't that take a little bit more for any of us in that position, a little more humility, a little more listening as opposed to talking, just like what you're saying, where you're stepping maybe aside and still facilitating, you're still, on and there and carrying that space for them at the same time where they're able to share with each other. And many of us that are planning and promoting events over this last couple of years, and now we're moving up, I was going to say mostly virtually now, things are changing a little bit and we're seeing a little bit of the light. But what you're describing is that it's still possible, even in a virtual environment, to still give them lots of great content. You're still teaching and giving them what you know at the same time that you are giving them the opportunity to hear from and see each other. And that, what a gift that must be for them. When we talk about people that are planning and promoting their events, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because many people that are either put in those roles or pushed into those roles or asked to take on a role of planning an event are usually the ones, they'll get things done. They're going to push something through. They're going to streamline a process. They're going to be the one that really motivates the team and knows who needs to be where, when, which is really a productivity role for teams as well. Yeah. You do this in other parts of your life. So you are planning all sorts of events in your world. Can you tell us a little bit how that skill that you have to have both the productivity and that connectivity in your world helps you actually plan better events?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think of the events I plan, and way back in my corporate days, I got sort of just slotted into that role whenever there was an event. I was also the executive assistant to a VP, and so it kind of fell naturally. And I didn't actually enjoy it back then. To me, it was about the logistics and making it happen, but I didn't have the maturity or the wisdom in my 20s to appreciate what it really meant to bring people together and what the impact could be. And I didn't like theming things, and I didn't like all of the swag that went with stuff. I had a lot of aversions to it. I have a completely different view now. And so micro events are my focus bubbles. So there's 10 or 15 a week. I feel like each one of those is an event in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And then there are larger scale events that I plan. I just came back from a retreat that I planned and executed, and completely, and this is the 8th one of that particular retreat event that I've planned over the last 8 years. And again, this year was I just feel like I finally grew up and figured out that, it's more about the people and the connections and less about sort of the logistics. They're important. The temperature of the room is important. We always hear about that. The food is important. All those things are important. But it was actually stripping out some content and leaving more room and more space, especially now because these people hadn't seen each other physically. And this is a group that I facilitate. So they meet monthly, but we'd been virtual. And so I knew it was so important for them to be able to hug and spend time together and debrief after each speaker, which we haven't built that in properly before. And I don't know why it took me so long to figure that out. You probably know that and are really good at it. So finally, we made space and time for that. And we also had content that focused on health and wellness instead of just technical business stuff, because this is a very high performing, driven group of women business owners in, 1 to 15 million revenue space. And so they're superstars. But we realized we needed to focus on wellness, because you're not going to run your business well if you're driving yourself into the ground. So I don't know if I answered your question plus a whole bunch more.
But beautiful. I just love what you're saying, because you started by saying the micro events with the focus bubbles. And truly those are individuals showing up to a group of 10 or 12-ish, maybe 20 people. And then when you're talking about highly driven, very successful women, you're running this conference for a group of women that well. It's not that these are new people to you. Yeah. But what's so fascinating to me, and I'll say heartwarming to me is that you've brought the humanity back to it. And it's not that we didn't want it before. I think when we think about our planning in 2018, 2019, a lot of people just had their way of doing things. And here's the binder. This is what you do. Check off all these things. You'll get the thing done. People will show up and then they'll leave and then we'll move on to the next thing. But what you're just talking about here is that you're moving us from the connection that maybe we naturally think should be there with a smaller group because we can see each other and maybe it's a little more informal, to something that really needs to be produced well. And the temperature does need to be good. And there's an expectation around how things will be running. But to create space, to create some margin and opportunity for people to have the conversations, great relationships, and great events where we've got the time. And little surprises can happen in between, which may make a productivity person like you or I, a little bit nervous. But when you see it working, that's the joy, right? That's where you can really say, oh, that's something that we wouldn't have seen otherwise if we had packed that schedule so full.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful when I see it in your life, in your work, and your focus bubbles, and in your corporate world that you have come from. Are there people that you admire in your world that are also natural connectors? I don't know that I've ever asked anyone this question, but
and absolutely, like in less than a second, a whole bunch of people come to mind. So in this WPO group that I facilitate, Women Presidents Organization, one thing I've learned is that the existing members are the best ones to bring new members. And we keep the group fairly small and they pay a fee and we meet and then we help each other. It's a mastermind. They help each other solve problems and I facilitate. And I have one particular member who is just an extraordinary connector. And every time I ask for a new member, she'll come to me with a list of 5 or 6 people. She'll do the introductions. Her name's Lisa Genovese. If she's listening, like she's just this amazing connector. And so I really appreciate people who, we all have the connections. Like every single one of my members I can look at will have, X number of connections on their LinkedIn profile. But it's that thoughtfulness. It's thinking about who is it that would appreciate this, who would get value from this, who would bring value to the group. Yeah, I'm super connector is a term that I love. I'm a super connector and I love hanging out with people like Danita, who connected us. She's a super connector.
Right.
So people who are just thoughtful of like, oh, hey, you said this and I know someone. I'm not sure why I need to connect you, but just like, let's go with the potential synergy and do the connection. And then this magic happens. And, you said something about having friends, on projects. I have a couple of friends who really got me through COVID, who I met through a coffee shop connection. Like someone said, hey, you should meet Joanne, go have coffee with her. And I was like, well, why? And they're like, I don't really know. You just need to know her. You guys will have synergies. And that was 4 years ago. And now she's one of my closest friends. We have a walking group through COVID. Just, sometimes I think as a middle-aged woman, is there an opportunity to meet new people and make new friends? And I get kind of closed about it and think no, and especially during COVID, but that's completely wrong. And when I'm open to these like email intros for connections, they can sometimes be very magical, like beyond just the business value. It's more about meeting a new person that has great ideas and is just lovely to connect with, like you. So
I love being surprised by sort of what like you and I had a conversation and we just kind of said, oh, well, what about this? And what about that? And it was such a natural conversation that it just felt like, oh, there'd be so many ways that we could collaborate. But it was almost not even about that. It was just about, wow, what a great feeling I was left with after that conversation with you. And clearly in the work that you do and the events that you do. And I love that you were able to share with us a little bit about the conference that you had just run, and that when you did create that margin there, that the others that were part of your circle could truly also feel that. And that maybe there was that space to go for a walk or to sit down and have, a coffee and in between sessions or something that really could potentially be that catalyst to something else. One thing I'd love to hear from you is when we talk about the connector's way. So really, when we talk about the connector next door, we're talking about you and how you naturally connect. And I'm really curious thinking about how you're showing up and what you've seen over your years of doing, the productivity, connectivity dance balance. If you were able to move that into a wider sense where we would start to adopt the way that you do things, the way that you learned now to focus on connection first, where could we see that in our community in a broader sense? What would make a difference in the broader sense for people that are listening, that are saying, maybe I'm just not naturally doing this, the way that Dawn does? What kind of encouragement or maybe tips that could you leave with somebody today on how to stay focused on the connection?
That's a good and a tough question. I think I'm interpreting it correctly. I'm thinking that not everybody is a natural connector, and it might be outside of their comfort zone. So one thing I noticed about people who connect well, like look for and listen for connections, they're very focused on listening versus telling. So it's the people who are at an event, who are asking a lot of questions and really truly listening to the answers. Like I was at an event the other day and someone said, I need it. It came up that her mom is elderly and living at home and needed some support. And literally that morning, I had spoken to someone who said they're starting a business doing senior support and care. And so it was just like, and I think there's some magic in the world, some synergies where you hear something and then you just know within a day or two, you're going to hear something else that connects to that. Have you read Big Magic by?
I have.
Yeah. She has beautiful language around that. And I can't really think of what she's saying, but really it's just listening. It really just is listening. Mm-hmm. And I actually because I have a terrible memory these days, I have a section of my to-do list. So I do a weekly to-do list that has 4 quadrants of my key commitments. And then below that, I have a list of who do I need to connect. And so I just, if I hear something, I just write it down, and then it's tracked and it's captured. And then inevitably a day or two later, like someone said, I need a person for this job. And then 2 days later, I heard somebody, I'm looking for this job. And again, it was a match. So
totally.
I don't know. It's just listening.
Well, and I think listening and holding it too, like you have it in your notebook or sometimes I'll put it in a voice memo or something like that. And when we become known as that person, I think people are watching us too. When we're listening well, when we can show up and make those connections in the way that you're describing them, the amazing thing is that kind of what goes around comes around. That's part of the magic, is that if we can just set it free, make the connection, rejoice in whatever, sometimes it works and sometimes it's not, the right fit or whatever. But I think sometimes just allowing that flow to happen, it really puts us in the right space where we're able to create more for ourselves and for our communities. And when I look at our communities, if everyone was doing that and listening in the way that you've described that so beautifully today, I feel like we would have a lot more of those interactions. And it would be coming to us as well. We can't get out of the flow once we set that in motion. How beautiful.
You said a couple of things in there I just want to comment on. One is I was thinking of, just connecting people, but it's listening for what resources. So an article or a thought or a quote that is, probably something I do a couple of times a day, just in the nature of what I do. And then the second piece of what you said is kind of what goes around comes around, or you get known for connecting. And so I didn't anticipate that I was going to become known for being a connector. And then people come to you and say, hey, I know you know a lot of people. And so it really expands quickly because the demand for connections, not demand or the request or the need, right? And then you become this naturally at the center of it, a little bit of a hub. And I've also, in my age and hopefully maturity and wisdom, I think when I started connecting people, I had an expectation of tit for tat. If I do this, you do this. And that was my immaturity and, some selfishness. And then I read Give and Take by Adam Grant, and then kind of learned, there's givers and there's taken and there's matchers. And I was falling into the matching category and I really didn't like that. It had a really uncomfortable feeling for me. And so I did a lot of work to sort of let that go. And I'm just going to give, but not fall into that extreme giver category where they're giving of themselves and sacrificing themselves, but to find that happy place where I'm giving and it feels good. And if something comes my way as a result, which is usually just more people needing connection, but which satisfies my soul and gives me purpose. And so it just works out. So yeah, Give and Take is a book I highly recommend. It's one of my absolute favorites, Adam Grant.
I will put the link below. I'm right in the middle of it. And I was we had gone to Saskatchewan to kayak for a week, and that was the book I took with me. Oh. And that was exactly the feeling that I got too. And we call it magic, but at the same time, there is a way that we can be showing up and we can be giving. And there is this reciprocation that happens just quite naturally. What a great way to kind of wrap our conversation today, because I think for many of us, whether it's natural for us or not, I truly believe everyone can become better at their connections and their ways of connecting. And I think our communities will be better if we really lean into what does connection mean for each one of us. And then we bring that to the table. And I think the diversity and the excitement and the magic that can happen through that, to me, is incredibly motivating. And I love hearing your story. I love having you here. How can people find you if they want to continue the conversation, if they feel like what you've said kind of has sort of sent them off on a little, processing journey of their own where they really feel like they could use your help? Where can they find you?
Anybody can reach out to me on LinkedIn. So I'm Dawn O'Connor, or Focus Bubbles, my website, focusbubbles.com. Instagram, I'm on Instagram every day, Focus Bubbles on Instagram, all one word, no dashes. And I'm pretty good at responding to quick replies. So if you are on Instagram, let's sneak into the DMs and I'll get back to you. But yeah, I'm open to anything and everything.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dawn. I'm so excited about our collaboration that's just sort of budding right now, and really excited about what 2022 is going to look like and how we can be supporting each other as well. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Great host.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.